And I just want to share a few thoughts before we give the a platform to Sister Gayatri. That when I heard this topic, understanding spiritual love, it was really a very interesting topic because it has three important words, which is understanding. We need education, we need knowledge to understand the true self and to understand what's going on now in life. And also, of course, the word spiritual, which is the true self, the real self. We call it the soul, we call it the self, we call it in Arabic the ruh, which is really who we are. And love. And of course, at these challenging times that the whole world is going through, I think the virtue of love is much needed. And love, of course, includes everything. It includes caring, includes respect, sharing, inspiring. And so really the realization lately is that only when there is the true discovery of the self, of the consciousness within, then we can have self-love. And then, of course, we can have love and good wishes to everyone around us, including nature. And so we will be hearing more from Sister Gayatri about this topic. I just want to give a small introduction. Sister Gayatri's actually biodata is very rich, but we're going to just summarize it. So Gayatri Naraine is an author, speaker, and she considers herself to be a student of a lifelong learning. She studies and practices Raja Yoga meditation. The pure intent in the service that she does is on developing spiritual life skills and integrating them into our practical lifestyle. Sister Gayatri represents the Brahma Kumari at the United Nations, where she engages in looking at the landscapes of the Sustainable Development Goals, which are called the 5 Ps: peace, people, planet, prosperity, and partnership. Within the context of the Sustainable Development Goals, she's a part of a team that explores transformation as a spiritual phenomena. Sister Gayatri serves also as the Vice Chair to the International Day of Yoga Committee at the United Nations. Gayatri currently lives in New York City since 1978, and she was born in Guyana. Sister Gayatri also is a co-author of the book Something Beyond Greatness, which she will be referring to during our session together. And just the last thing, my experience with Sister Gayatri, actually, I've known Sister Gayatri for the last 10 years, and she has been a wonderful inspiration and a teacher. And I just really loved whatever time I shared with you, Sister Gayatri, in New York and in India. So very, very happy to have you with us today, and we're looking forward to hear from you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mona. Let me apologize for my throat. I don't know if I'm coming down with something, but there's something there in my throat. So I hope you can hear me clearly, everyone. And you'll be able to understand what I'm saying, regardless of my throat not being so good. It is a pleasure to be with all of you today and to share on this very interesting topic of understanding spiritual love. Because I think at this time in our world, during this pandemic, one of the things that people are realizing is how grief is breaking hearts. And so it seems as though humanity actually is going through a broken heart. And how can we mend that broken heart? How can we put the pieces together? So I'd like to start on a lighter mode, and that is tell you a little story I heard. And it was a child asking his parents, what is the meaning of a solar eclipse? And in the language that you explain to children, the mother said to the child, and this is what she explained. Legend has it that the sun and moon were deeply in love with each other, and somehow they were unable to meet. It seems as though time was preventing them from meeting. Time seems to be the problem. And so what happened, this went on for a period of time, and then there was a solar eclipse. And the solar eclipse was the meeting between the sun and the moon. And of course, the earth quaked. The earth, I suppose that was the first earthquake. So I wanted to start with this very simple metaphor of spiritual love. It's something that happens in a meeting. It's something that gets experienced in a meeting. The solar eclipse is a metaphor for a meeting of love between the soul, the lover, and God, the beloved. And of course, in this meeting of love between the soul, the lover, and God, the beloved, the entire panorama of life got revealed. So for me, before we go into understanding what spiritual love is all about, I think let's attempt looking at the meaning of spiritual love. Let's go to the meaning, and then we look at the understanding of it. As you heard from my bio, I practice Raja Yoga meditation. And for me, meditation is a meeting with life. And through this meeting of life, it's as though I'm meeting myself, the soul, life. I'm meeting with God, the Son, and that is life. And in this meeting of life, the greatest love is experienced. To be in remembrance is like giving yourself fully to God. It's giving the soul fully to God, not parts. I'm not just giving my mind. I'm not just giving my heart. I'm not just giving piece of my personality. But I'm giving my whole self to God fully. And through this giving, I'm able to somehow make a shift to believe in a higher love that is unlimited. I think ultimately this is what really matters at the end of the day. Trying to understand spiritual love is perhaps the first step. But for me, what really matters is believing much more in God's unlimited love than in the limitations of human love. Because human love usually is riddled with expectations. And when I use the word believe, I'm connecting it to, of course, understanding, a deeper knowing based on that understanding, and then experiencing it, feeling it in my very being. So understanding spiritual love requires me to experience and to know, and then to discern that difference of what I'm experiencing, what I'm knowing, and what I'm believing in does require me to have a kind of a subtle discernment. So let's start with spiritual love. What it's not. I'll start off with what is not spiritual love. One, spiritual love is not a love that centers on desires and yearns for physical contact and gratifications. Other, spiritual love is not a love that makes you subservient and codependent. A love that requires you to be unconditional with relatives and friends and others, even when they disempower you with their behaviors. Listen to this one. Spiritual love is not intimate love between two people based on a commitment to vows. It is not an exclusive love. Spiritual love is not a category of relationships. And spiritual love is not a product. It's not a commodity. It's not an idea. And for me, it's not even a cherished belief. These are ways that we seek to infuse spiritual love into our lives and into relationships and even into our creativity. We have become people in pursuit of love. We are seekers of love rather than being in love. So understanding spiritual love for me is about being in love. Being in love requires me to open myself to the realization of a higher love. So I'm sure I've started putting pebbles in your mind by telling you what spiritual love is not. So then what is spiritual love? Now, in explaining to you what I experience to be spiritual love and what I understand to be spiritual love, I'm going to take you to that higher level, that higher love, that somehow there's a space in our souls, a very sacred space that nothing could touch, but it is like a secret hiding space there, that a spark, you just need one spark, and that love would emerge out of that secret space in our souls. And so in this context, that is waiting to burst forth, and for that experience of a higher love to be had, I'm going to describe what this higher love is, what this spiritual love is. So what is spiritual love then? Spiritual love is a supreme feeling. It gets ignited when the soul reconnects to God. Some refer to this as our spiritual birthright. Some refers to it as a supreme feeling or a supreme emotion. Some refers to it as a spiritual power. But it is that gets ignited. The second is that spiritual power turns ordinary life into a great life. Because this love emerges from a supreme source and flows into the soul and connects to that secret spark of that same quality of love in the soul, and then it flows through the soul like a conduit, it influences everything. Once it flows in, it influences. So what does it influence to make something ordinary into something great? It influences the way I think, the way I feel, the way I act or do, and it also influences what I become. It can actually make the impossible possible. You know, we've heard about love can move mountains. Well, that's the impossible into the possible. Another quality of spiritual love is that it gives the recognition of my self-worth. When that spiritual love emerges from inside of me, I get the experience, I can only describe it as this, and hope you will stay with me with this poetic language. It makes me feel a sense of inherent and exquisite, it's like an exquisite experience of the recognition of self-worth. To me, that's a precious thing to touch in oneself, one's self-worth. And it takes the soul into an extraordinary sense of self. Now, this is not ego. This is not arrogance. This is just a recognition of a worth that gives me a sense of who I am. I think it answers that question, who I am, because it places me or into a state of being from which this worth is reflected back to me. But the beautiful thing about that is that my self-worth is seen through my presence. And when that self-worth shines through my presence, I tend to look at others in the same way. And one of the beautiful concepts of spiritual love, igniting that self-worth, is that I can then see others with love and as legitimate others. I don't discriminate. The other element of spiritual love is that it transcends and it includes. You heard that spiritual love is not exclusive. It's an inclusive love. Spiritual love is transcendent. It is a higher love. But what does it transcend? When I say, if I'm experiencing spiritual love, what am I transcending? What I'm transcending are the silos that we have built, both in the ecosystem of the soul. We have divided our souls, the ecosystem of our souls, and outside of ourselves. And so we tend to put people in boxes. We tend to put silos in terms of the issues of the world. And we tend to see the world as fragmented. But spiritual love, once it's a love that transcends everything, and then I'm able to include. So I'm able to remove the silos, remove the parts, remove the divisions, and I'm able to see the whole. It gives one a space inside to be comfortable. And if I'm comfortable with myself, I am going to be comfortable with others. And perhaps I can even give them the space or the permission to be themselves with me without me imposing expectations on them. I think it gives us that space to be truly who we are or who I am. And then the other one and final one that I can think of is that spiritual love gives capacity. This I like very much. It gives us a capacity. Because when the soul experiences this love from God, from the divine, it is as if there's a soul expanding experience. It's as though my soul expands. It builds capacity. And I become aware of life. And life as a tapestry with all the intricacies on this tapestry. But along with that, the capacity it gives me to look at the tapestry of life with all its intricacies is wisdom, acceptance, and attachment. So now we've looked at these two things: what is not spiritual love and what is spiritual love. So let's go now into the understanding. How does this work? I mean, I just said some really lofty things about love, and I'm talking about a higher love because it is spiritual love, and I'm talking about a love that the soul has access to and the soul can draw from if the soul connects with the Supreme Being that embodies this quality of love. But in understanding, for me, this spiritual love, what I'm really understanding is that how do I take this higher love that I am connecting to, drawing from, becoming a conduit of, and allowing my soul to flourish. When I ask myself that, the inquiry that arises is this organizing question, which I'm going to ask you. And I want you to think of this question for the rest of the time I'm going to be talking to you. And for me, in reflecting on what really matters at the end of the day, when we are looking at spiritual love, is it to become what? What is it I want to become? What is it this spiritual love is going to make me into? And I think we all want to be better human beings to begin with, but not just better. We want to aspire to accessing and to tapping into our fullest potential. We want to live by that full spiritual potential, and in this respect, the potential to love and to be loved. So for me, this organizing question that I came up with is, what is life asking of love? What is life asking of love? You know, someone said to me that there is a part of our lives when we started falling in love. And this falling in love meant we broke all the principles of love. And each time we broke the principles of spiritual love and we brought it into a secular love, a love that divides, a love that is exclusive, a love that we try so hard to please and cannot please, a love that had jealousy. We broke all these principles of spiritual love. And then what happens, there comes a time, the solar eclipse, when the sun and the moon meet. And what happens in that meeting of the greatest love of all is that humanity was then asked to rebuild these principles that were broken. So that rather than falling in love, we started being in love. So what is life asking of love? Because life and love are very close. They're like the sun and moon. So I think what life is asking of love, so that life could generate love in a way that would lead to a transformation of consciousness in the world, I think are four things. Life is asking love to help it to use its eyes to see with love. So life is asking of love to see with love. Life is asking of love to act from the heart, to tap into the genius of the heart and to act. Life is asking of love to recognize destiny, that I'm always in the right place at the right time. And life is asking of love to be selfless, to be altruistic, to have a flow of these pure and selfless intentions. So if that is what life is asking of love, life is now using spiritual love to reconstruct itself, to rebuild principles, and to re-emerge as who it truly is. So for me, spiritual love creates a deep inner resonance with life and the way life expresses itself. Whether it's seeing, whether it's acting, whether it's destiny of being in the right place at the right time, or whether it is at the level of intentions, pure intentions. I think these four elements is a transformative force in life, and they're all connected to spiritual love. I will now share with you a few experiences of how this works, because it's a context. And you may say, look, she just gave us a theoretical framework. She just went into various aspects of love. But I feel that you need to ground it. We need to ground it now into some real life experiences. Way back in 2004, that's a long time back, but it's one of the high points of my life in terms of, as you heard, one of my favorite things to do is to take spiritual life skills and to integrate them into our everyday living, or what I call as the secular world. And so this project that I worked on in 2004 was something that really left a very deep impact in my heart. And the deep impact that it left was this deeper understanding of spiritual love and how it works. And so this project was called, it turned out to be a book that was called Something Beyond Greatness, Conversations with a Man of Science and a Woman of God. It was done to present to Daddy Janki for her 90th birthday. Many of you may know Daddy Janki, but some of you who don't. She was the administrative head, the chief administrative head of the Brahma Kumaris. And she passed away in March of 2020 at 104 years old. So we were doing this book for her 90th birthday. And one of her favorite subjects of life was altruism, especially in the field of service. So in preparing this session for you today, I became aware that, wow, this is where I want to land when it comes to making spiritual love practical. Because here are some real things that we need to look at when we are applying spiritual love to our lives. And so this book, which was called Something Beyond Greatness, and lo and behold, the something revealed itself as love. And the conversations that occurred were just reflections from a person. His name was Umberto Maturana, and he's left the body now, was a cognitive scientist, and he studied the biology of love as a scientist. And then he reflected from that perspective on the stories, and Daddy Janki, the woman of God, reflected on the stories from a spiritual perspective. What they were both looking at in relation to the stories as something beyond greatness was how love actually worked in people's lives. So it was very fascinating. One of the things that emerged from that science, from that research project I did, was a deep recognition that spiritual love is a powerful, underused potential in all souls. It's not that some souls have spiritual love and others don't. All souls have a spiritual right to spiritual love. And this right means that there is something inside of them that will reignite that experience, whether knowingly or unknowingly. And so it's not just dedicated to people who are on a spiritual journey to say only they can experience spiritual love. No, everyone has spiritual love within, but it just needs reigniting. And so I suppose we who are on the spiritual journey, we put more thought into it, we contemplate in it, we try to make sense and meaning out of it, we have a purpose, that's connected to it and all of that. But others may see spiritual love emerging from their lives, and they may say, oh, this is a courageous act, or this is a miracle. So, but it's there. So let's go back to that organizing question as I share these stories with you to make it practical. The organizing question of what is life asking of love? I will share with you a couple of stories. Hopefully I have time to do it. And the stories actually were where these four elements emerged from. What is life asking of love? It's asking of love to see with love. It's asking of love to act from the heart. It's asking of love to always know you're in the right place at the right time, destiny. It's asking of love to have pure intentions, to have selfless intentions. So, bearing that in mind, let me share the first story with you. Keeping those four elements upmost in your mind. Now, the first story is about New York subway. Now, I live in New York, so I chose the story because I feel that we have a lot of heroes that you hear about in the US, but I doubt ever if you've heard about a New York subway hero. Well, the story goes like this. Wesley Autry was 50 years old, and he's I think he still is a construction worker and a Navy veteran. And he lives in New York City, and he travels to New York subway. So this one morning, he was taking his two daughters home before he went to work. So he was waiting for the train on the subway platform. Now, as he stood there, what he saw was a man began to collapse, a young man, he was about 20. And the person, his body started convulsing, and he started to kind of get his balance going, but he was falling over. And then finally he fell and he tumbled onto the subway tracks. And Wesley Autry, with his two little daughters, saw this. And of course, instinctively, he rushed to help. As he rushed, he saw coming the lights of the number one train, and he said in the interview with the New York Times, he said, I had to make a split decision, a decision in the moment. And he said, I made the decision and I leapt. So what he did is that he jumped onto this guy whose name is Cameron, and he pressed him into the space between the rails and pushed the body down and pushed himself down. It was like a foot deep. And the train, of course, the conductor noticed what was happening, but couldn't stop the train. So there were about 5 cars that moved over their heads. He said, so close that even his knitted hat got the grease from the train. Now, while doing that, he started hearing all the people on the subway, you know how New York subways are crowded, screaming. And he says, hearing their scream, all he could say when he heard that was, we're okay down here, he yelled back at them. I've got 2 daughters up there. Let them know their father is okay. And he said, then he heard their applause. But at that time, of course, the train power was cut, and they got them out, and the student was taken to the hospital. And, it was like, oh my God, that instantaneous thing that happened, it only happens in New York, probably. We found out from the news that this guy, Cameron, had a seizure, fell, and Cameron was good. He didn't have any other problems in that, he didn't suffer stroke or anything. So this incident happened after Mr. Autry was interviewed by the New York Times. And they asked him the question, what happened to you? Why did you do that? It's a question we all have when we are in the New York subway. If someone falls, what do I do? If this happens, what happens? Because there's so many people gathered together. His reply was that, I don't feel I did anything spectacular. I just saw someone and I responded because that person needed help. I did what I felt was right. And then they say, but why you? And he said, I was in the right place at the right time. Now, that's the story about this guy that reflects that moment in which a spiritual love emerges that aligns so perfectly that he was able to do something that was impossible, something that anyone who had to think about it wouldn't have done it, I suppose. And so this is for us, when we did the research project, what spiritual love is all about. It somehow, when this guy, Wesley Autry, acted in that split second, what did he see? Seeing with love, he didn't see he was a different nationality or who is this guy or what is happening. Seeing with love, he saw someone in jeopardy and he leapt on the tracks to help that one. Regardless of the train was coming, he saw the lights. When he saw that, the instant response of seeing, actually seeing with love, aligned the other. He acted from his heart. He knew he was in the right place at the right time. And he did it without any reason. I mean, without any selfish interest. And so this is what I mean with when there is spiritual love that emerges out of a soul. And I don't think Autry was a meditator, but just spontaneously that love emerged, that spiritual love. It was like a soul expanding experience that made him do things he wouldn't normally have done. It didn't appear that he was thinking that he has to make a choice here, whether he should do or not do. He instantly leapt and he saved a person's life. Now, also in the spiritual love, when someone does something like that, in this expansion of the soul's ability, the capacity for the soul to see everything and to act accordingly, there's a great deal of humility when they're talking about it. And, you know, it's a spiritual love for me when it gets expressed in these moments. I call them moments of greatness, moments of expressing spiritual love. It's that it is almost as if there is an inner readiness in the soul that seems to appear from nowhere. And so the person himself doing that courageous act or doing that act of greatness, as we would call it, they themselves don't know why they did it. So they don't take credit for it. It is as if they feel they were a conduit, they were an instrument, they were something to do something with, you know, logical sense they wouldn't have done. So this is what I would call spiritual love. And at that moment, this was what life was asking of love in relation to what Autry did. And I think that, like these little stories, what they do for us is that they give us a persistent evidence that that fundamental love, that spiritual love that exists in every soul has the potential to drive goodness within everyday life and in everyday people. They make this little spark makes ordinary people experience greatness in life. So I wanted to share one other story, but I don't know if I have time for it. But it is to do with another element of spiritual love in understanding it. And that element is more a considered one. And it's to do with forgiveness. And for me, this was a hard one. This was a really hard story when we were looking at it and we were researching it, because we all face it. And people who are aware and are told that spiritual love is a transformative force, spiritual love is a purifying, has purifying elements if it's used in the way that you connect to God and you take a power from God and you use that power of love, you can transform situations. But when it comes to forgiveness, I think it's a harder one to look at. And so we spoke to a woman. She was young at that time, and she was from Nigeria. Her name was Hafsat Abiola. And her father, whose name was Masood Abiola, he won the country's first democratic elections after 10 years of, I suppose, dictatorship. And then that elections got annulled and by the military, and he was incarcerated. And the sad thing was that he died on the eve of his release, which was even harder for his daughter. So when we were interviewing her on Something Beyond Greatness, because we had heard about her work in Lagos, she was very pensive when she was talking about love and talking about spiritual love in particular. And this is what she said to us. She says, you know, when I think about what happens to my father, I get very angry. She says there are certain things that make me very angry. So much so that her husband sometimes says, I can't believe on one hand you could be so loving, but on the other hand you could be so angry. One moment you're loving, the next moment you can be very angry. But she says, when I think about my father and know how he was betrayed by his closest friends, especially one of his closest friends, she calls him the real Judas, who actually, you know, made her father become incarcerated. She says, it disappoints me. Now she's naming the emotion, it disappoints me. And she says that when I get disappointed in that situation of what they did to my father, I feel disappointed with myself, that I'm not able to use this love, this higher love, to deal with the situation. She says, you know, sometimes I think that if I were to walk into a room and see this guy who betrayed my father, I would like to walk up to him and I would like to extend my hand to him and in forgiveness, I really mean it. But she says, I cannot do it. And she says, because she cannot do it, she says, I feel really concerned about the limitations that I possess and how difficult it is to forgive because there's still anger in me. Now, she is saying that even though she believes in a spiritual love, a higher love, she's not able to use it because there's so many limitations. And of course, her limitation is anger. And so because we were having Maturana, the scientist, and Dadi, the spiritual person, reflect on the stories, we ask them to reflect, to help us reflect on what really is needed. What was life? What is life asking of Abiola in terms of love? What is life asking of love in relation to Abiola's story? And their reflections were quite interesting on this whole subject of spiritual love in relation to forgiveness. Maturana said that how would spiritual love work? He calls it love because he doesn't see it as spiritual necessarily, but he calls it love. He says that it may happen that she may go to this man, this person who betrayed her father, and tell him, I know you betrayed my father, but I have no anger anymore. I have lived in the world. I have seen how the world is changing. And so for the peace of my own soul and for the harmony of my living, I wish you well. He said if she had done that because she was in her spiritual love, then what do you think would have happened? The man, he's setting up this scenario. The man would have said, oh my goodness, she knows that I did this. And I believe in her sincerity. She's no hypocrite. So the spiritual love, acting from that spiritual love, when it is devoid of anger, this is what happens. The other person would hear it. The other person would know the sincerity of it. And the other person would know that she's no hypocrite. She's not just saying it, but saying it purpose. But what was more interesting for me was what Maturana said. And that is, he said that with spiritual love, when you're acting from the heart, the action touches the other's heart. And the other would see that action, especially in the realm of forgiveness, as an act of love. They would see it as an honest person attempting to go beyond a painful situation. So what would be seen as her greatness wasn't the result of the action, but it was the generosity of her spirit. And if she was able to do it, and this is our challenge, working with spiritual love, if we are able to truly recognize that spark and let it flow, connecting to the source, we would truly be able, in our acts from the heart, free ourselves from the resentments that we carry. And however, he said she wasn't ready for it because she didn't have that alignment or that harmony with the source that would give her the power to do it enough or sufficiently. Because if she were to just lip service, at least she was an honest person to recognize she wasn't ready for it. But if she were to just go up to this person and said, okay, I forgive you. I just wanted to liberate myself, but she wasn't free from her resentment, she wouldn't have been able to forget it. That anger would stay with her even stronger. So when there is spiritual love in forgiveness, we also have to forget. Because forgiveness, spiritual love says, forgiveness does not occur if you don't forget. Forgiveness occurs only when you forget. And he described forgetting. He says forgetting means to forget even the emotion that holds you to what had happened. And love, spiritual love, could set free that emotion that holds us and prevents us from forgiving. So I thought that was an interesting, and he's a scientist coming, reflecting on this story. But Daddy Janki then went even deeper into explaining to us how spiritual love works. And I think this, I will end with this because it's the ultimate meaning of spiritual love. Daddy Janki says that the same ones who brought us sorrow and anger will come in front of us one day to be forgiven. He says to hold on to that hurt or resentment that someone has betrayed me or someone has deceived me makes me a hostage to that. And she says that what is spiritual love? What is life asking of spiritual love? It is for us to see these instances as opportunities to forgive. And if we can do that, we will help to reduce not just our pain and suffering that's happening inside of us, but to help reduce the pain and suffering that's also happening in the other. And she says this is why when we talk about spiritual love in relation to forgiveness, we're talking about love, we're talking about mercy, we're talking about compassion. And so I would end with this sentence. Someone forget their own misdeeds is the highest form of spiritual love. And this is what life is asking of love. Thank you and Om Shanti.
It's very beautiful, Gayatri Ben, and I think these stories make them very practical. So we have few questions, but I guess we will take them after the meditation, if it's okay.
Okay, sure. So I'll do the meditation now. Okay.
And take your time. We have time. I mean, it's okay.
Okay, yeah. So let's use this organizing question. What is life? Asking of love. Spiritual love is God's reflection of a beautiful life. Spiritual love sees the beauty of souls. Beauty of life makes me love more. Spiritual love lives within me. All I need is to ignite it. To become aware of it. To recognize it as a spiritual birthright. And to let it flow naturally through my being. Spiritual love is being in love. My being is consumed with this higher love. spiritual love, is a transcendent love. I transcend my limitations. And I am in awe of this unlimited love. When I'm connected to this unlimited love, it flows through my being as a supreme feeling. And my being, life, asks of love. Flow naturally through my eyes, so that I can see the whole. And not the parts. Life is whole. It's not fragmented. Life asks of love. See the whole. Life says to love, remove the thorns from my heart. Open my heart to its true generosity. Life asks of love to act from the heart. And to let each action become a poetic one. Life asks of love be the ink in its pen of destiny. to be present in every moment. Recognize that love is necessary in every place and in every time. Life asks of love. Be altruistic. To be selfless. So that the pure love that emerges from the source and flows through the being becomes a transformative force in the world. Om Shanti, and thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Gayatri Ben, for that lovely meditation. So someone is asking if you can repeat the last sentence that you ended with, if you remember.
I think I was sharing about Daddy Janki's piece, and she was saying that the highest form of spiritual love is if you can make someone feel that they haven't done something to you. That would be the highest form of forgiveness. One is a forgiveness that you forgive someone and you get rid of the resentment and you get rid of the anger. But she says that is one part of spiritual love. But a complete spiritual love is that you would, in your presence, the other person would forget it as well. And when that person could forget that something like this happens, then that's true forgiveness. So on both levels, it is forgiveness and forgetting. So she says that's the highest form of spiritual love, when I can do that for another. And you see, this is what I like. Beautiful. Yeah, and this is what I like about spiritual love. It is not a self-centered love. It is a love that includes. And so if I would want it for myself, I would also want the other to experience that for themselves. Now, this is hard for forgiveness because you heard Abiola's story, that it is something that is not easy to do. Especially, she was so close to her father. She said, you know, I could be a lioness to protect my cub. And so that's the intensity for anger. So yeah, that's what Daddy said.
That's very deep, very nice. There is one question that says, and if love had a personality, what would love ask of life?
Love would ask of life, love would say to life, sorry, I broke all the principles and I fell. And life went tumbling after me. And so I think it would apologize to life for having done what it did to life. Now, you know, someone said, I asked the question, could love destroy life? And I got such a reaction from people. Love can never destroy life. So I said, but look at our history. How many relationships got destroyed because they tried so hard to love? So they say, well, that's not spiritual love. So I said, yes, you're right. That's not spiritual love. But sometimes when we are on a spiritual path, love is such a predominant force that we want to have in our lives, such a predominant experience we want to have in our lives, that sometimes we forget that it's always do this with love, and you're not loving, and you're this and you're that. But what is, how is love helping life? So if I were to give love a personality, I would give it the personality of the genie, the genie in the lamp. And so when it gets out of the lamp, it's constantly asking the master, what can I do for you? What can I do for you? And it would only obey the master. So my personality, iconic personality, would be the genie in the lamp.
Very nice. And just back to that story of that brother with the train who went and jumped to help his soul brother.
Yeah.
Why is it sometimes in his case, his conscience, I think, was very much alive. I mean, another person might have seen the same incident, but maybe he wouldn't have the courage to go and do what he did. I mean, is there anything to uplift the consciousness? Why would someone react in this way and another person wouldn't maybe, have the courage to jump? What's your thoughts on that?
I think it was because it was his time to do that. So you see, the four elements are very interesting because it was from Audrey's story that we pulled these four threads. And or we call them principles. And so you see, spiritual love is not a strategic plan. It doesn't plan strategically. And so therefore you don't act with reason, right? You just spontaneously do something from your heart. And so he was there. And remember, he had his two little daughters with him. So it wasn't that he was alone. He had to leave those kids in the hands of strangers. And so I think with spiritual love, my understanding is that when you're wherever you are, that love, because it's innate in the soul, could spring forth for you to do an extraordinary act. And it would be a spontaneous act, and you would have no thinking to go with it, and you wouldn't know why you're doing it, but you feel compelled to do it. So now, later on in the book, Dadi Janki described that as instrument consciousness. She says sometimes when you are in a situation and you're looking at something, if God wants to use you as an instrument in that moment, you will feel connected to a soul expanding experience that would make you do the impossible. And when people ask you after, you have no idea why you did it. And so this was like a miracle. It was like a story that hit New York Times, and he became a New York subway hero. And everybody knew about it, and everybody was in awe because it has no logic as to why you do it. But when it's connected to that spiritual love, you will do things that are amazing, but it would always be connected to something very human as well. He said when he was asked, anyone could have done it, but no one did it. He did it. So that is the ultimate thing was when you're connected to God, when you are to be used as an instrument, miracles will happen. And that's what we have to believe in, that this genie would subtly ask life, what do you want me to do? Save another life? Then do it. And so it is as though that soul expanding experience happens, the capacity builds, you transcend all the limitations, and you jump, you leap, and you do that. And for me, that is what spiritual love is all about. And that's what I'm convinced, after doing that research, that it's not just about when it's awakened that it works, when someone is aware of this spiritual love and is connecting to the source for it, but it actually works with people who are non-aware spiritually, because it does exist in everyone's soul. And people get opportunities to have a glimpse of it through other people's actions and what they do. So that's the only explanation I have. I don't have a logical explanation because it's not a logical act.
Which means it's something like just like an instinct within the soul, within the self.
Exactly. And it's more like a call. It's more like you have to do this. There's no question.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so this takes us to the next question, which says that how to be in spiritual love forever, and if not forever, at least to the maximum time. No doubt we feel spiritual love, but for few times. How to be in it forever, as
how to sustain it.
Yeah, or I think the question is how to have it all the time, because you have it sometimes.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that if we recognize that spiritual love is within me, and the more I use it, it's the more it will, or not use is the wrong word. The more I cultivate it, it's the more it's going to work through my life naturally. So I believe, and I'm going to tell you another story and reflecting on this, that when one enters a spiritual path of spiritual growth and of self-realization and of God realization, one enters into a love story with God. So this meeting that happens with God turns out to be a love story. And this love story with God it's not a story, but it's a meeting that results in a love affair with God. And so God then cultivates, every time I'm in remembrance of God, God is cultivating within me this spiritual love. And he's filling within me. He's like opening this potential more and more. So it's blossoming and it's growing. And then it naturally emerges. As I said, it influences everything I do. One drop of God's love influences me from the level of thinking to the level of doing. And so I begin to recognize this is what is happening in my meditation. This is what's happening in my remembrance. So it's this love that God is generating within me and cultivating within me. And then he's saying, I'll go into the world and express it. And I come back to him, and then he does more, and I go into the world and I express it. And then at the end of my period of time, when this love story is fulfilled and everything within me is fulfilled in this love affair with God, guess what he says? Now go and live happily ever after. He doesn't say to me, now go and be in love forever. He says, go and live happily ever after. So I always think about those fairy tales in which it's one big love story. And at the end of it, it says, live happily ever after. So I think that the sustainable aspect of this love is something that requires a very simple method that we need to make practical. And it is a method that says, you are being in love, right? It's a being in love with God. So you have to consider yourself to be life, which is the soul. And then that life is connecting to the source, God, the supreme soul. God is the source of this love. And I am, with this connection, the love is being sustained in me. As much as that love is sustained in me, that's how much I'm going to be able to sustain it through my actions with others and through my relationships with others. And so it requires a little bit of attention that I need to ask. This is why I love the organizing question. What is life asking of love? What is life asking of? I wake up in the morning and I'm saying, what is life asking of love today? I have a challenging situation. what is life asking of love now? And I think that if that organizing question becomes something that helps me to understand how to nurture and sustain love in my life, it would be very useful.
Very lovely. Thank you. So I think the word I take is really attention, understanding that love is within me, and then just spreading that love. I think it's when we forget and then we become attached to, let's say, bodily love. That's where I think what's beautiful about spiritual love is that there is no attachment, there is no pain, there is no suffering, like, you know, the Hollywood and the Bollywood movies that we think that's love. Beautiful. And really,
but
God's love is that.
It's not an attention that creates a pressure. I think for me, life is an inquiry. And the more I inquire, when life wants to experience something, it will go through a process of inquiry into what it wants to experience. And so the more I go into an inquiry of the relationship I have with love, it's the more I'll sustain that love within me.
It's a very natural kind of, yes. Thank you so much. We come to the end of our session. Gayatri, thanks for your time, for your beautiful sharings, and the stories are really very much touching. So really lots of love to you, and thanks for being with us. And I just want to announce that tomorrow also at 6:30 to 7:30 Kuwait time, we have online meditation with Sister Aruna Latva. So please welcome whoever likes to join. We're going to have the ad soon. And thank you, Gayatri, and lots of love to everyone in New York and the States.
Thank you all very much. It was lovely being with you, and good luck.
We look forward to having you here after the pandemic in Kuwait.
Yes, sure.
Bye-bye. Thank
Bye.
you.
Okay, see you. Bye-bye.